She came to sign a 500 donut merger, but when the mask slipped, she tore up the contract instead. The sky over East Hampton was dull and overcast, like even the weather was unsure how this weekend was going to go. A sleek black SUV rolled up the gravel driveway of the Bington estate. The kind of place that didn't just whisper wealth, it announced it with every inch of its marble columns and manicured hedges. Inside that SUV sat Danielle Renee Given, founder and CEO of Neurospace. 41 years old, born in Trenton, New Jersey, raised by her aunt after her mother passed away from lupus when she was 10. She had built an empire out of code, grit, and late nights. And now here she was finalizing a deal that could shift the direction of tech itself. She adjusted the collar of her slate gray blazer. Nothing flashy. She didn't like attention for the sake of attention. She liked results. "Ma'am," her driver said, stepping out to open the door. "We've arrived." She nodded once, more to herself than to anyone else, and stepped out. The house was massive, but sterile, all white stone and glass, like someone built it for magazine covers, not actual people. The front door opened before she could reach it. Danielle, a tall, trim man with silver hair and an aggressively polished smile, greeted her with outstretched arms. "Charles Bington. A pleasure." Danielle extended her hand. "Good to meet you in person, Mr. Bington. Call me Charles, please. We're practically partners now." She smiled politely, though she knew better than to think they were equals in his eyes. The Bington family had built their wealth through old money, oil, and banking. And now, in their attempt to stay relevant, they wanted to swallow up the innovation they couldn't control. Behind Charles stood his wife, Victoria, in a champagne-colored suit that probably cost more than Danielle's entire wardrobe. Her expression was polished too, friendly, but reserved, like she hadn't yet decided if Danielle belonged here. "Welcome to our home," Victoria said. "I trust the flight was smooth." "It was," Danielle replied. "Thank you for having me." They let her inside. The place smelled like lemon polish and cold money. A staff member, young Latina woman in a black uniform, took Danielle's small leather bag and disappeared down a hallway. Charles began pointing out various pieces of art and architecture as they walked, but Danielle's mind was elsewhere. She'd come here to close the deal. $500 million in equity, global distribution, expanded R&D funding. It was everything most CEOs would kill for. But Danielle didn't come from most CEOs. She came from days of eating crackers and mayonnaise for dinner and watching her aunt sew uniforms late into the night. The Bingtons had invited her for a full weekend, some formal dinner tonight, brunch with shareholders the next day, and a closing ceremony on Sunday with a PR crew waiting, everything choreographed. But just a few steps into this house, Danielle felt something cold pass through her. Not fear, not intimidation, just awareness. She was the only black woman in the room in the house, probably the weekend. "Let me show you to your room," Victoria said, gesturing toward the stairs. "We've put you on the second floor, the East Wing." Danielle paused. "I thought the other guests were staying in the West Wing." Victoria's smile didn't move. "Yes, but we figured you'd appreciate more privacy." Danielle's eyes held on Victoria's for a second longer than was polite, but she said nothing, just nodded. As she walked upstairs, her phone buzzed in her hand, a message from her CFO back in San Jose. "Any red flags?" She stared at it for a moment before typing back. "Too early to tell, but the air is already thick." But something told her it wasn't just the weather that was about to turn. Danielle stood by the floor to see the window in her guest suite. Outside, the ocean stretched into a hazy gray. Inside, everything was beige and glass. The room looked expensive, but empty, like no one had ever cried in it or laughed too loudly. She set her suitcase on the bed and sat down, letting the silence thicken. Not a photo, not a book, just silence and curated furniture. She'd been in rooms like this before. Corporate apartments, private lounges, donor retreats, spaces where you were invited in, but only on their terms. A knock broke the stillness. It was Clark, the family's assistant. Young, white, overdressed in a navy blue suit that didn't quite fit him right. "Miss Gibbons," he said, not quite looking her in the eye. Dinner will be at 7 sharp. Formal. The family would like to introduce you to a few of the board members and close friends before the full announcement on Sunday. Danielle nodded. Thank you. He hesitated. There's a stylist downstairs if you'd like touch-ups or suggestions. That last word hung in the air like fog. Suggestions. She raised one eyebrow. I think I'll be fine, Clark. He flushed and disappeared. Danielle didn't need a stylist. She had worn a deep navy sheath dress, sleek, strong lines, nothing extra. Her natural curls were swept into a soft, low bun. Her gold earrings were small, controlled. Everything was intentional. She always dressed like she knew exactly where she was going, because she did. Still, she stood up and looked in the mirror, checked her posture, adjusted her watch. Not for them, for her. Downstairs, the estate had shifted from sterile quiet to something that buzzed under the surface. Champagne being poured, hushed greetings, the rustle of expensive fabrics. Danielle stepped into the hallway just as another guest emerged from a room, a tall older man in a tuxedo and designer sneakers. He looked her up and down, not unpleasantly, then gave a short nod. Evening, he said, accent thick with old Boston money. Evening, Danielle replied. They walked down together in silence. The dining room was vast, 12-foot ceilings, candlelight, and a view of the sea that didn't feel real. A long mahogany table sat in the center, set for at least 20. At the head of the table sat Charles Bington, already sipping a glass of scotch. Victoria stood near the fireplace, laughing softly with an older white couple in pearls and navy blazers. Danielle scanned the room. There were no name cards at the table. Charles spotted her and stood. Our guest of honor. He walked over, arms wide again. Everyone, this is the brilliant Miss Danielle Given, founder, innovator, future of tech. The room gave polite applause. One or two people smiled. A few nodded stiffly. Victoria appeared at her side. Come, dear. Let's find you a seat. But instead of guiding her toward the head of the table, where decisions are made and stories are told, Victoria walked her down toward the middle. Not the worst seat, but far from the ones that mattered. Danielle sat, her eyes flicking toward the head of the table. She saw the seating pattern immediately. Men in suits, wives in pearls, board members, and descendants. The Bington sons were already laughing with guests. A waiter poured her wine without speaking. She didn't touch it. Across the table, a man leaned in. Tan, slick-back hair, 30-some. So, he said with a grin, you're the genius Charles flew in. Danielle looked at him. Genius is a stretch. But yes, I'm the CEO of Neurospace. Neurospace, right? That's the thing with a I and machine thinking or whatever, right? Her expression didn't change. Yes, we build decision systems for autonomous data processing across defense, healthcare, and finance. He blinked. Oh. The woman next to him chuckled. We just assumed you worked in media. You have such presence. Danielle let the comment land. Then she smiled cool and tight. I'm sure you meant that as a compliment. Of course, the woman said, sipping her wine, not looking back at her. But Danielle could feel it already. This wasn't about business. This was about reminding her where they thought she belonged. Plates clinked. Glasses tapped. The low drone of laughter floated from the front of the table where Charles held court, swapping stories from oil deals and private jets with the men who thought they ran the world. Because for the most part they did. Danielle sat among strangers who kept mistaking her for a novelty. So Danielle, said an older woman across the table, eyes narrowed like she was trying to read something written on Danielle's face. Where did you go to school again? Stanford, Danielle replied. Oh, that's lovely, the woman said, sounding surprised. Good for you. Danielle gave her a small nod. Thank you. Next to her, a man with a square jaw and a loosened tie leaned in. You know, he said, I told Charles one like this move, getting some color into the portfolio. It's modern, sharp. Danielle looked at him directly. We're not paint samples, and Neurospace isn't a diversity hire. He chuckled, not hearing her. Or maybe not caring. No, I meant it's bold, right? Very next gen. The woman next to him gave a nervous laugh, and whispered something to the man who just shrugged and sipped his wine. Danielle picked up her water glass, her hands steady, but her mind alert. She'd been here before. Maybe not this estate, not this family, but this table. These smiles, these comments wrapped in compliments like barbed wire dipped in sugar. Across the room, she spotted Gregory Bington, Charles's middle son, talking with two hedge fund guys near the bar. His hair was slicked back, his shirt unbuttoned just enough to show he didn't have to follow the rules, the kind of man who wore loafers with no socks and still got the job. He saw her, winked. She turned away. Victoria tapped her glass twice with a dessert fork. "Everyone," she said, standing with that politician's smile. "We just want to thank you all for joining us tonight. This weekend is a celebration, a merging of minds and missions. Neurospace under Miss Given's extraordinary leadership has changed the way we think about technology." A few claps, a couple nods, someone cleared their throat. Victoria continued, "It's rare to find innovation with such heart. Danielle's journey is one of determination, intelligence, and most of all, courage." Danielle clenched her jaw lightly. Courage. The word hung in the air like she just recovered from a trauma instead of building a billion-dollar company. Victoria raised her glass. "To bold futures." Everyone echoed it. "To bold futures." Danielle raised hers too silently. A few minutes later, Gregory made his way over to her section of the table, laughing too loudly at his own joke. He slid into the chair beside her, uninvited. "Danielle, right?" he said, pouring himself more wine. "I've heard all about you. Big brain, big company, big leap." "That's me," she said, eyes locked on her plate. He leaned in. "Between us, Dad thinks you're impressive, but there's still some concern about the temperament thing." Danielle turned her head. "Temperament?" "Yeah, you know, founders like you, you're passionate, driven, but passion can turn into, what's the word? Volatility." He grinned, like they were sharing a secret. "And let's be honest, a $500 million handshake needs more steadiness." Danielle stared at him. Then she said, "Tell me something, Gregory. If I were a 45-year-old white guy in Patagonia fleece and allards, would you still be worried about my temperament?" He blinked, then laughed, awkward. "Come on, don't do that. I'm just asking. You don't have to be so sensitive. I'm just saying what the board's probably thinking." She stood. No announcement, no scene. Just stood. "Excuse me," she said, calm as stone. She walked away from the table, ignoring the stares and raised eyebrows. Her heels tapped across the stone floor until she disappeared into the hallway. But the thing about silence is it doesn't mean you've lost. Sometimes it means you've just decided you're not going to entertain foolishness. The guest bathroom off the corridor was pristine. Chrome fixtures, a long mirror, the kind of place built more for show than necessity. Danielle locked the door behind her and exhaled. Not a sigh, just air leaving the body like her lungs refused to carry the weight of one more forced smile. She didn't cry, not because she didn't want to, because she couldn't afford to. She stared at her reflection, strong jaw, steady eyes, hair slicked back like armor. People always assumed being composed meant being cold, but they didn't understand what it costs to hold yourself together in rooms designed to make you feel small. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was her CFO, Shauna Kim, checking in. "How's it going?" Danielle hesitated, then typed, "I'm reconsidering everything." The typing dots popped up. "Talk to me." Danielle stared at the screen. "It's not just a bad dinner, Shauna. It's who we'd be tied to. Their name would sit next to ours on every letterhead, every press release. I'm not sure I can stomach it." No response for a moment. "Then you always said, 'We don't beg for tables, we build our own.'" Danielle's fingers paused. That sentence, it hit her harder than any of the microaggressions tonight. She had built Neurospace from a laptop in a public library, not with money, with code and caffeine, and a vision so stubborn she couldn't let it die. And now here she was being told her leadership was emotional, that she should be grateful, that her place at the table came with unspoken conditions, a soft knock at the door. "Danielle." It was Victoria. Danielle opened it. Victoria tilted her head. "Everything all right?" Danielle smiled faintly. Just needed a moment. Victoria lowered her voice. Listen, I know Gregory can be blunt, but don't take it personally. He's just entitled, Danielle said, folding her arms. Victoria blinked. Well, privileged, yes. Danielle looked her dead in the eye. Victoria, let me ask you something. If your son ran a company like mine, and would he be asked about temperament? Would you sit him away from decision-makers? Would you like to do something? Your guests assume he was hired to check a box? Victoria hesitated. You're interpreting things in a very specific way. No, Danielle said. I'm interpreting them exactly as they were given. Silence. Victoria's mouth tightened. This deal is a tremendous opportunity for both sides. Danielle nodded. That's what I'm starting to question. Victoria gave a polite smile. Well, I hope you'll reconsider. Whatever it is you're feeling right now. Danielle held her gaze. I'm not feeling anything, Victoria. I'm thinking. She walked past her down the hallway back toward her room. Inside, she opened her laptop. Her inbox was flooded. Investors, board members, journalists, waiting for the announcement Monday morning. She opened a blank draft, typed one sentence. After careful consideration, Neurospace will no longer pursue partnership with the Bington Group. She stared at it, then added, We believe integrity cannot be negotiated. She hit save, not send. Not yet. She'd sleep on it, but her gut had already decided, and when Danielle Given trusted her gut, it rarely led her wrong. But Sunday morning was still ahead, and what she said next would echo louder than anything they said about her. Sunlight poured into the room the next morning, lighting the walls like a spotlight. Danielle was already dressed, black slacks, cream blouse, hair pulled into a low twist. No jewelry, no noise, just clarity. She sat at the edge of the bed, laptop open on her lap, staring at the draft she had written the night before. Her finger hovered over the trackpad, but she didn't click anything yet. A soft knock. Come in, she said. It was Shauna, her CFO. She had caught a red-eye from California after reading Danielle's message. You flew in? Shauna nodded. You didn't sound like you needed strategy. You sounded like you needed backup. Danielle smiled. Thanks. They sat for a moment in silence. You really want to walk away from this? Shauna finally asked. Danielle didn't answer immediately. She closed the laptop. I think I already did. Shauna leaned back in the armchair near the window. You know what Wall Street will say. Overreaction. Unprofessional. They'll spin it like you were difficult. Danielle nodded. Let them. Shauna studied her. I'm with you no matter what, but you don't have to do this to prove anything. Danielle stood and walked to the window. I'm not proving anything, she said quietly. I'm protecting everything. Neurospace was never about just the money. It was about what's possible, what's next. And these people, they don't see us. They see something shiny to control. Shauna exhaled. So, what's the plan? Danielle turned around, calm, certain. We hold the press briefing today. No drama, no shots fired, just truth. Clear, professional, public. Board's going to ask 1,000 questions. I'll give them 1,000 answers, Danielle said. But they already know who I am, and they know I don't bluff. Shauna grinned. You sure you don't want to at least tell Gregory where to stick his dad's money? Danielle smiled. Tempting, but no. Dignity first. There was a beat. Then Shauna asked, What are you going to wear? Danielle laughed. You think I'm doing this in a hoodie? 2 hours later, Danielle walked into the main salon of the Bington estate where Charles, Victoria, and their legal team were gathered. The mood was stiff, polished, like a storm had already passed, and everyone was just waiting to see where the debris would fall. Danielle, Charles said, standing, hands clasped in front of him, like a man used to being thanked. We need to talk, she said. They sat. I appreciate your hospitality, Danielle began, but I've decided to withdraw from the merger. Victoria's smile faltered. Charles blinked like he hadn't heard her correctly. I'm sorry. I'm withdrawing. Effective immediately. Charles's voice stayed calm, but his face turned red. Danielle, we have a deal on the table. Final stage. Do you realize the amount of capital you're walking away from? I do, she said. And I realized the kind of company we'd become if I took it. Victoria interjected. If this is about Gregory's comments, it's not just about Gregory, Danielle said, cutting her off gently but firmly. It's about tone positioning. The way you treat leadership you don't recognize is familiar. Charles tried again. If we offended you, Danielle raised a hand. You didn't offend me. You confirmed for me that this was never a partnership. It was an acquisition dressed up like progress. Silence. She stood. You can keep your check. Neurospace will be just fine. But her words wouldn't just stay in that room. In a few minutes, the world would hear them too. Danielle stood in front of a plain white backdrop at the East Hampton Community Center. Not the Bington estate, not some grand ballroom, just a small hall with a podium and a row of folding chairs packed now with reporters, photographers, and a few early arrivals who'd heard whispers that something big was coming. Shauna stood off to the side, checking her phone, managing press. No one knew exactly what Danielle was going to say, but the media had smelled smoke, and they came to find the fire. Danielle adjusted the microphone. No teleprompter, no script, just a stack of note cards in her hand, barely glanced at. Thank you all for coming, she began, steady, clear. I'll keep this short because clarity doesn't need much time. She looked up right into the cameras. After deep thought and careful consideration, I've chosen to withdraw Neurospace from the pending merger with the Bington Group. Gasps. A few pens scratched faster. Flashes from the cameras started popping like nervous heartbeats. This decision is final, she continued, and it's not based on money or legal technicalities. It's about something far more important. Values. She paused. No one moved. Neurospace was founded with one goal, to build technology that advances human potential. But it was also built on something harder to measure. Dignity. Accountability. Vision. I've always believed the culture of a company matters just as much as its code. She flipped the card. Over the past 48 hours, I've learned enough to know that a partnership with the Bington Group would compromise the DNA of what we've built. Not because they're not successful, but because their success was never built with people like me in mind. Silence. They invited me to their table, but it was clear from the moment I walked in. I wasn't expected to lead, just decorate. A murmur moved through the room. Danielle went on unshaken. This isn't personal. This is about principle. Neurospace will grow with partners who see us, not just our numbers. And I say this to every founder, every leader, every woman, every person who's ever been told to shrink in rooms they earned their way into. You don't need to accept disrespect for the sake of opportunity. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Wow." She finished without flair, her voice steady, even. We're not in the business of selling out. We're in the business of building up. A pause, then applause. It started small, but grew fast. Reporters shouted questions. Microphones pushed forward. Danielle, what did the Bingtons say? Will Neurospace be seeking another buyer? Are you worried about market impact? Danielle raised one hand, smiled slightly. We'll answer all of that in time, but today isn't about them. It's about us. And with that, she stepped back from the mic. Shauna joined her off stage. You just lit the internet on fire. Danielle raised an eyebrow. In a good way. Oh, in a very good way. They walked out together through the side door toward the waiting car. As they pulled away, Danielle looked down at her phone. Notifications, hundreds, then thousands. One stuck out. A message from a young founder she didn't know. Thank you for showing us how to walk away with our heads high. Danielle stared at it for a long time. But the real wave was still coming, and Danielle had just changed the way business. Leaders like her would be seen forever. The next 48 hours were chaos. Not for Danielle, but for the Bingtons. Headlines spread like wildfire. Black woman CEO walks away from 500 DA deal over values. Neurospace founder refuses to decorate the table. Withdraws from Bington merger. Danielle given draws the line, and the public is cheering. Every major business outlet ran the story. Clips of her press conference were everywhere. TikTok, Twitter, morning talk shows, even late-night monologues. The internet did what it does. They pulled up old interviews of Charles Bington talking over female executives. They found Gregory's college tweets. They dug up Victoria's speech about preserving legacy at a closed-door charity gala. One board member quietly stepped down. A few sponsors dropped from the Bington Group's quarterly fundraiser. Their PR team scrambled to paint the incident as a misunderstanding, but it didn't stick because Danielle hadn't thrown a tantrum. She hadn't stormed out. She had told the truth calmly, clearly, and the world had listened. At Neurospace headquarters in Palo Alto, the mood was electric. Employees wore her words like armor. Someone printed T-shirts that read, "We build, we don't beg." Danielle didn't approve them officially, but she smiled when she saw them. Investors called, not to scold, but to support. "I underestimated what this would do for your brand," one of them admitted on a call. "But you've got loyalty money can't buy." Other partners, smaller values-aligned ones, reached out. Venture firms led by women, BIPOC-owned equity groups, even international science coalitions looking for innovation without ego. Shauna walked into Danielle's office a week later with a folder. "We got 5 new offers. One of them is from the Dyson Institute. They want to co-develop your defense model into a commercial safety net for urban hospitals." Danielle didn't even look up. "You believe it?" Shauna grinned. "They said they would work under our structure. Now." Danielle looked up. "Well," she said, "that's different." Later that night, she sat alone in her office, lights low, the city glowing behind her. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. "You didn't just protect your company. You gave us permission to do the same." Danielle read it twice, then put the phone down. Her mind drifted back to that long mahogany table, the one where she'd been seated halfway down like a guest, not a peer. They'd wanted her genius, just not her voice. But what they didn't understand was her voice was the genius. She didn't need their table. She was the table. And the world had just learned, if you can't see the value in someone's presence, you'll feel the power in their absence. Never trade your values for validation. Never let power silence your purpose. You don't have to shrink to fit into a room, especially if you've already outgrown it. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their worth. Speak up when you're overlooked. And if you've ever been told to be grateful just to be in the room, remember you can always build your